Right, well, thank you very much for joining us this morning, bright and early on a Monday morning. Today we are going to be talking about HR and employment, and I'm delighted to have Ros Hammond here today from Employment Law in Action. Welcome, Ros.
Thank you.
And I've known Ros for a very long time. And you know, what she doesn't know about HR and employment isn't worth knowing. So delighted to have you with us. I know you've been extremely busy, so thank you for sort of sparing the time out of your busy schedule to come and join us today. So normally I'll hand over to you. You can give us an update on the situation as you see it. And as you see it today, because things are changing by the day, and then just open up the floor for any Q&A.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. I have to apologise because I am also working from home, and the kids have been strictly told not to enter, but I can't guarantee it. So there might be some small people that come in at some point. So I apologise in advance for that. I thought it might be useful, and you may already have read a lot about furlough and know a lot about it, but just to give you an overview around the government scheme. As you can imagine, over the last week, things have just kind of evolved massively. Situations changed massively with this grant that the government are giving us, which is I have to say absolutely incredible, that they're doing that. So I thought if I just tell you a little bit about furlough, and if you've got any questions at all, just raise them. It might be easier as we go along, or just make a note of them. But basically the furlough scheme, so furlough itself actually isn't, there's no statutory definition of furlough. They could have used any term at all. In fact, Daniel Barnett, who's barrister in employment law, he did a seminar on this when it first came out, and his view was, you could have called it a Cadbury's cream egg. It has no meaning in terms of that. But what it is it gives you the opportunity to access this grant and pay 80% of your staff costs or your staff salary, and also to claim back employers' national insurance and employers' minimum pension contributions. So it works in one of two ways. If you have a layoff clause in your contract of employment, and a layoff clause is something that a lot of companies probably don't have. We tend to put it into as a standard in most of our contracts, just because it's one of those things you never know if you ever need. And actually it used to be used probably in the 1970s most in manufacturing, when there wasn't work in some of the big factories on a Friday or whatever. So, it's a very unusual situation to have a layoff situation. So if you have a layoff clause, then what that means is that you can, in essence, tell your employees you don't need them and sometimes layoff clauses will have notice in. They don't have to, but it just depends on how they're written. What the furlough does is it works alongside that. So instead of just having what would have been the guaranteed payment, you instead can pay your staff 80% up to a cap of £2,500. So that's kind of how that works in conjunction with the layoff. Prior to furlough, the statutory payment for layoff was £29 a day for 5 days. That was it, just one 5-day period. So it was £145. So that's, I think, probably why the government were partly looking at this and saying, well, there's no way we can have all these people being laid off and having no income. So that's one side. The other side, the other reason for having furlough is because people were having to lay people off and make them redundant. So again, the government was trying to stop that happening so people could still be retained by their employers. If you don't have a contractual layoff, and it's got to be a contractual layoff clause, it can't just be in a handbook with general reference, it's got to be a contractual right to do it. But if you don't have that, then in essence, what you can do is you can consult, and I'll talk about what that looks and feels like in a minute, with your staff and place them on this period of furlough. Because it only represents 80% of their salary, and in essence, you're not requiring them to work, it's a contractual change, which is why you need to consult with them. But the consultation will be, would you like to take furlough? This is what it represents. This is what it means. Yes or no? Yes, we do. Great. Here's the letter. Sign, and you need to sign that acceptance of that contractual change. Now, companies can top furlough up. They can pay up to the 100%. That's not a problem. They can do anything over and above that. But it just gives you an opportunity to manage your longer term cash flow if you want, and also retain your staff without getting into a redundancy situation, so that hopefully when we're through the other side, you will still have your team working for you. Now, in the main, most employees, of course, will accept furlough because the alternative is potentially being made redundant. And if they have less than 2 years service, then all they'll get is their notice pay. But you may find that there are one or two who won't accept furlough. So it's what we do with those individuals. I mean, you could either make them redundant, or you could look at other things. You could maybe, if you still need a handful of employees because you still have projects going on, then it might be that you look to allocate whatever work is left over to those people who are not being furloughed. So any questions so far on furloughs? Quite a lot of information there. So
could I just have one quick question, please, Ros? So you can't, anyone who is furloughed can do no work, nothing.
Yeah, no work, nothing.
Simple as that.
Yeah, nothing, not even an hour's work. And the guidance is quite clear on that. It's an all or nothing situation. So in terms of how furlough works, it's in 3-week blocks. So you furlough somebody for 3 weeks, if they have no work. If there's still no work beyond that, then you furlough them for another 3 weeks. Yeah. So depending on what you do and what work might come in. So for some organisations, there might still be a requirement for people to work. So what they might do is they might do an alternate 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off with some of their team. So people are sharing the workload. Others might say, actually, we just don't need them indefinitely until we're through the other side. So you'll just furlough them indefinitely. And then when we're through the other side, you can then bring them back to work at that point. But the critical thing is it's got to be in 3-week blocks. And that's what how the funding is going to be set up. During that furlough period, they will still be employees. So they will still have all of their employment rights. They will still have all their contractual entitlements unless you consult with them to get out of that contractual entitlement. So an example of that would be company sick pay. So if you pay an enhanced sick pay, so anything that's over and above the statutory, one of the things that you might want to do if you haven't got a layoff clause and you're consulting with them about this contractual change is also consult with them about the fact that you're not going to pay that contractual sick pay during the furlough period. And that's important, and I'll explain why in a minute. The other question that I've had is around holiday pay. You know, do people still get, because they're employees, do they still accrue their holiday throughout the whole of the furlough period? Anything that's contractual should still, and whilst they're still employees, should still carry on unless you consult to get out of that. But your problem with holiday is the fact that they still have a statutory right to the equivalent of 5.6 weeks a year, the 28 days if you're a full-timer. So you can't actually consult out of a statutory right. But if you pay an enhanced holiday, it might be that you can do something with the enhanced element. So holiday will still accrue. What the government have done is they've now, I think on Friday, announced that they will extend, they will relax the working time regulations around when holiday has to be taken. So they're now looking at over a 2-year period as opposed to a 1-year period. So when people return to work, you're not suddenly going to have a shortened period of time when they have to use their holiday. It's now going to be spread over the 2 years. The UK hospitality, I know, are lobbying government at the moment to see whether or not during periods of furlough, people wouldn't accrue holiday, or they could take holiday at the same time. But the government so far have been silent on that. So the position, from our understanding at the moment, as from today, is that people still accrue all of these things because they're still employees. And it's no different to being on sick leave or maternity leave or parental leave. You still have those rights and they accrue. So why the sick pay is entitlement is really important is that if someone has got the virus or they're off on long-term sick, then they will have to still be paid that sick leave, because that's the predominant reason for them being off. Yeah. So sick pay, if you like, trumps furlough. So that's a statutory entitlement. That's what the situation will be. So say someone's got a back injury, they've been off for a long time, they're still receiving sick pay, and they then go, oh, hang on a second, you could furlough me instead of paying me sick pay. Well, are you fit to return to work? Are you able to work? Well, no, I've still got my back injury, I'm still signed off for another month. Well, in that case, you have to remain signed off on sick pay for that other month. So the whole purpose about furlough, it's about replacing someone's salary because you haven't got work for them, but they are fit and able to work. So that's the critical thing. So if somebody's off on maternity leave, maternity pay and maternity leave will still be the main reason for them being off. If they wanted to return early from maternity leave and benefit from the furlough, they can do, but they have to give the requisite notice to return early from that maternity leave, which is 8 weeks. And then at the end of that furlough period, obviously they're back working as a normal employee. They can't then go back on to maternity leave. So these are things that you've just got to remember. So someone has to be fit and able and willing to work at a moment that you stop furlough. That's kind of the thing to remember. With the self-isolation, so that's caused some areas of grey, I suppose, in terms of, well, I've got somebody who's self-isolating. Do they get furlough? Can I furlough them? Well, our understanding is, and from the guidance, is that if somebody is in a household with somebody who's got the virus, then under the rules, they have to self-isolate for 14 days. And that's the principal reason for them being off. So because of that, they're entitled to the SSP, and that is the first 14 days you can reclaim back from the government. So that will be the reason that they'll be off, and therefore they can't be furloughed until the end of that 14 days. Where someone's had a letter, you might have come across it. So some people are getting these letters, you mustn't go into work, you're in a high risk group. You can furlough those people. So that may be helpful. The other problem that you might have, of course, is if somebody gets the virus whilst they're on furlough and they tell you about it. Now, we're a little unclear, but I think probably from the guidance is that they may have to go on to SSP. But that's, of course, if they tell you about that. Because the principal reason then for them being off is because they're sick. So there are a few question marks with it. And I think one of the things that you've got to think about is if it's something you're looking to use, is who do you not need in 3-week chunks. So it might be that, I don't know, if you've got admin support, for example, you can see that falling off, and maybe you could furlough them for 3 weeks. Maybe they could come back and do a week, and then they could be furloughed for another 3 weeks. So I think you've just got to kind of map out what you might need or not need in order to then see how the scheme would fit with you. Any other question? Have I raised any more points that you'd like to ask some questions on?
Do they still have to pay student loans while they're on furlough? Because all my staff seem to have student loans. Yeah.
So all the normal deductions will still apply. Oh, okay. So pension, national insurance. Now it might be, and I've not come across anything on student loans, and it might be that there is some guidance. I haven't done the research, so I've not been asked that question. It's not in the guidance, other than that normal deductions will apply. Because they're getting 80%, I would assume that they could still make that loan payment. Now, it might be that that makes them drop below. I don't know if that has an impact, because I think it's a threshold, isn't it, an earnings threshold for student loan repayments?
I don't think it probably would, to be honest, but it's not a lot of money, but if they're on the 8%, it would, if they didn't have to pay the student loan, it would kind of obviously
have an impact.
It would have an impact. Yeah. So that was kind of, yeah, it was just that I noticed when I was checking to see what they were paid.
Yeah.
Through everything, it was the student loans. There's 2 of them with student loans.
So, I mean, it might be that they need to go to the provider and see whether or not they can take a holiday in respect of it, and that might be being dealt with separately. But certainly, my understanding is that normal deductions would apply. We're going to get more guidance from HMRC in terms of then how to make the claim. But I think that's probably going to be more from a company perspective rather than the impact on the individual. Yeah. And you can, of course, if you wanted to, you can top it up to 100% as well. So I don't know how, that probably doesn't help massively, but I think you probably
that's good.
I assume that it's probably going to come out. I mean, the other thing to bear in mind as well, in the guidance, they did say that any of the furlough payments that are received, you then need to account for as a revenue, because you're deducting it. So it's going in at the top and then it'll be taken out the bottom. So you will still need to account for it. But I guess we'll get more guidance, or certainly the accountants will get more guidance around how that will work in principle. It'll just be a paper exercise, I suspect, around that.
One question, Ros, on clarification. The limit, was it 2,800 or something?
500, yeah.
2,500. Is that net or gross?
So that is before tax, before they're at their 9 tax.
That's before the deductions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to spend a bit of time just talking about actually how that's made up, the percentages. So you've got a variety of different workers or employees, and it only applies to employees. It doesn't apply to casual workers if they are truly casual workers. It doesn't apply to self-employed. So these are only employees, okay? We've had a few questions come in to us around, does it apply to casual workers? If they are truly casual workers and on a casual workers contract and they work on a completely ad hoc basis, then we don't believe that this applies to them. And certainly in all the guidance, it talks about employees. It does not talk about workers. So you have, if you like, a couple of different ways of calculating it. So for your salaried employees, people who have the same amount of money more or less every month, then it will either be 80% of their wage or 2,500, whichever is the lower amount. For employees that receive fees or commission or bonuses, that is not included. Okay, so that sits outside. For those whose pay actually varies, it is a bit more complicated than that. So where you've perhaps got people who might be on a 0 hours contract and come and have more flexibility in terms of their hours. If that's the case, then either you have to look at what they earned in the same month the previous year, or you have to look at what their average earnings were in the whole of the 2019-2020 tax year. And then whichever is the higher amount is the amount you use, obviously subject to the cap. If they haven't been with you that long, then what you do is you look at their average of earnings since they started work for you. So that's how that's calculated. It only applies to employees who were employed by you on or before the 28th of February. So if you've had any new starters since that time, they will not be eligible for furlough. So whether or not for example, if you've made an offer to someone to start with you and they haven't started with you yet, then it may be that they could appeal to their previous employer to see if they'll take them on or keep them on until we're through this so they can be furloughed. But that's down to the individual to decide that really with the previous employer. It can be backdated to the 1st of March, but I think there's a bit of confusion. And again, we're not entirely sure as to whether or not you can backdate it to the 1st of March, whether you've instigated the scheme or not. I suspect not. I suspect you actually have to furlough somebody to then take advantage of it, but it's not clear from the guidance. So that's having a bit of debate at the moment. So I'm sure when it comes through the HMRC, we might get some clearer understanding around that. If any of your employees want to volunteer, now that doesn't mean volunteering for you to do the job they've just been furloughed from. It means volunteering. So some people might say, well, actually, I'm going to go and volunteer and help the NHS, or I'm going to go and volunteer and help the vulnerable. Then they can do that. That's fine. But the critical thing about any volunteering is that it can't generate revenue. That volunteering cannot have a revenue impact or provide services for an organisation. So I think some people are thinking, well, actually, if somebody wanted to volunteer and just check their emails, for example, whilst they're on furlough, that's likely to be counted as working. And of course, then you might find that you're not going to get reimbursed for the furlough if that's the case.
How is that policeable? Just out of interest.
Sorry?
How is that policeable? How are they going to govern that?
I don't know. I guess, I don't know, to be honest. I guess it will be down to people whether they whistleblow or not. So if other employees see it, that's your risk. They might decide that they're going to instigate a whistleblowing claim. If you do it and you get whistleblown on, then you could be in big problem, have big problems then. And of course, I would think that we haven't got guidance around the fines yet, but I would think that's the next thing is we'll start to get guidance around people who abuse the system and what those
Someone
fines.
checking their emails would be regarded as working or creating revenue for the company, would it?
Yeah, and they're very clear on it. They say that even conducting an hour's work would be deemed as working, and therefore furlough will not apply. So you do need to just think about that. And it's a tricky one because, of course, employees naturally don't want to come back to an inbox of, not all employees, but I would think, most employees do not want to come back to an inbox of several thousand emails. Like when you're on holiday, you may well flick through your emails and deal with them as they come in. But you've got to be really careful about it because, if you do get caught out on it, then you may find that the furlough payments are not honoured by the government. So I think you've just got to think that through and what the mechanics are around that, whether they can have an auto forward onto somebody, they just don't access it, and you're really clear when you're writing to them to confirm that they've been furloughed, that they must not do those things. And I think as long as you're really clear about it and you're with your instruction, then that will help you.
Would it be a good idea to make sure that the emails are forwarded, in the sense that would be the mitigation that they're not going to deal with it, that somebody else has actually got responsibility for dealing with it as a policy? Because otherwise you could get stuff that just goes to the one employee, and other way of dealing with it unless they do something, forward it or something like that. Yeah,
I'd put your out of office on, set up a forwarding rule. I think that's a really sensible thing to do.
Can I just have a quick question? If I stick, for argument, someone on furlough for 3 weeks is the minimum, is it?
Yeah.
So if I stick someone onto furlough for 3 weeks, can I then pull them out of furlough if a job comes in that they're required for?
Well, the guidance says it has to be a minimum period of 3 weeks. So I think my concern with that is that you may find that you don't then get reimbursed for it. So, that's the risk of it, I guess. You've got to just try and measure how that work's going to be done, if you can wait for 3 weeks for it to be done. But that's what the guidance says. It talks about blocks of 3 weeks.
Those 3 weeks need to be consecutive blocks, or if you furlough someone for 3 weeks and then decide, right, okay, I need this person back in action for 2 weeks, they can then come back to work for 2 and then I can furlough them again?
Yeah, I think you'll probably find doing that. I mean, it's silent on that, the guidance, but what it says is you can only submit one claim at least 3 weeks, which is the minimum length an employee can be furloughed for. So from that, our understanding is that you can do that. You can bring people back to do work and then refurlough them. It doesn't say you can't, and certainly it's not just our interpretation, but it is interpretation for others as well. But I think if you want to make the claim, you've got to make the claim for a minimum of 3 weeks. And then at the moment, they're putting in place that this is going to last for 3 months, but that 3 months has started to tick from the 1st of March. Then they'll review it. So I guess, at the moment, we don't know where we're going to be in just over 2 months' time. One would hope things would start to get back to normal, but we just don't know. So I think, their intention is if people are still required to work from home, or whether or not there's going to be a period of time, even when things are calmed down, as people start to get back to work, whether furlough will still be in place then for a period of time, I don't know. That's just something we don't have sight of at the moment. I'm hoping it's not going to be, right, everyone back to work, furlough's closed and off we go. I would think there would be some kind of transition period, but as I say, I'm second guessing that. I don't know for sure. Do you have any other questions on furlough? Because I was going to talk then about some other things that you might want to do if you weren't in a position to furlough, or didn't want to furlough all of your team, but perhaps don't have enough work for them to be engaged 100%. Okay.
I have a question, and it's I saw a tweet from Martin Lewis where he confirmed self-employed limited company directors can be furloughed as employees in their PAYE element, even if they're sole employee. Is that right? It can, I'm a director of a limited company. I'm a sole employee. So can I furlough myself?
Only if you're not going to be doing any work. So I think that's the key thing. There's no reason why directors who are on PAYE can't be furloughed, but the same rules apply. So if you still need to do work to keep your business afloat, then the answer is no. But it might be that that there's not going to be any work for 6 weeks, for example. So you could furlough yourself for 3 weeks, 6 weeks.
You can't check your emails though, Chris.
But you can't check your emails. Yeah.
And I can't put a forwarder on either.
So there's in principle, there is no reason why that
I've got a question about health insurance or health scheme, health cover, and presumably other benefits. Would those still apply and be unaffected by furlough?
Yeah, all your contractual entitlements would carry on unless you, as part of that consultation, in putting people onto furlough, you agree that they're not going to apply during that contracted period. So it might be, if you're able to take, for example, a holiday from your permanent health insurance scheme or your medical scheme or whatever for 3 months, that actually then, as part of that contractual arrangement you have to furlough people, you say, and you won't be covered for the 3 months for this. But you need to do that as part of your consultation. So think carefully again, if you're putting people into furlough, you don't have a layoff, what other contractual things is it likely to have an impact on, and make sure that's all reflected. Okay, so some other things that you might want to think about are what do you then do? So who do you select for furlough? So our advice is, and for some larger organisations, it's quite tough because actually there may not be any distinguishing factors. But I think if you're looking at it, you've just got to be careful because the discrimination legislation still applies in terms of who you may or may not select. So you can't say, well, I'm going to select you because you're a pregnant woman, for example. But what you can do, actually that's probably not a very good example for what I'm going to say now, because actually one of the things you could do is you could say those who are vulnerable and have been detailed as being more vulnerable or at risk by the government, you could use those first. So actually a pregnant woman is one of those people. but providing that's the reason you're doing it, because she's vulnerable. But if she could work from home, then there is always that potential issue that there could be a discrimination claim there. So I think just be careful around who you furlough. Have good business reasons for it. Look at what the work is that you need people to do, and that automatically will probably self-select a number of people. And then look at the skills that you need to do that work. You know, as I say, there is an opportunity here as well to kind of mix it up. If your work was able to do that, we have 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So I think, you know, just think carefully about it. If your people are obviously client facing and there's no longer client facing work for them to do, then that helps in terms of saying that they would be the ones potentially who you would furlough. So you just need to consider the nature of the work, and just bear in mind that, you know, the discrimination legislation is still there. And I am sure as a result of all of this, we're going to see an increase in claims being put through, because it's a natural thing that would happen with any of these sorts of situations. So just be cautious. Some of the other things that you might want to think about if you're not able to furlough, so bear in mind that furlough is no work at all, it's all or nothing, but you might still have enough work for keeping somebody engaged 50% of their time or 75% of their time. So you could agree with them a reduction in salary or a reduction in hours perhaps to help you do that, or moving to a 3-day working week. What you can't do is, as we always said, you can't mix it up. You can't have furlough for 2 days, working for 3 days. The only consideration you need to have, of course, is for those employees, if you're going to suggest to them you only need them 75% of their time and you only want to pay them 75% and their colleagues are being furloughed on 80%, of course, they're not necessarily going to agree to that contractual change. So you just need to think about the mechanics and how you're going to keep those people still wanting to work for you during a period when other people aren't. And for some people, actually, they'd rather be at work, so actually they don't care. But for others, they might not. They might think, hang on a second, I'd rather be sat at home doing my DIY for the next 2 months. So again, just think about it. And it's all through what your business need is and then discussing it with your team to see what kind of solution you can come up with. I mean, there are a few things out there about actually for those who are working and staying working on projects, maybe you should look the other way. I don't think that's particularly helpful, because the whole purpose of this exercise is to try and reduce your overheads and your costs. And what I mean by the other way is incentivize people to stay and do the work rather than be furloughed. But ultimately, it's your decision. You don't have to furlough people. If people make a request for furlough, you don't have to do it. It's up to you as to what you want to do around that. Other things that you might want to think about, we've touched on holiday briefly. If now is an opportunity and your cash flow allows you to, you could ask people to use some of their holiday instead of being furloughed. You obviously don't get the furlough grant for doing that, but it is an option. It gets that holiday used up so that when we're through this the other side, those people have already used their holiday or some of their holiday, and then you know that they can just, you know, they'll be ready for work. So again, you could think about that as an option perhaps. Now with holiday, if you don't have a clause in the contract which allows you to vary the working time regulations and insist people take holiday without notice, which is something that we would always suggest putting in the contract, you have to give twice the amount of notice to holiday. So for example, if you're going to insist that somebody took a week off, you have to give them 2 weeks advance notice of that. But again, just kind of going back to the furlough thing, you can say perhaps, all right, someone takes furlough for 3 weeks and then maybe a holiday for a week. You know, there might be a way of kind of mixing it up if that's something you wanted to do. I think we've probably talked about accrual of benefits during furlough as well. And then ultimately, the government have talked about, you know, whether you can still make people redundant whilst they're on furlough, and the advice is no. I mean, I think that's a risk to still do that, because the purpose of the scheme is trying to prevent that, and of course that might mean that you have a claim from those individuals if you then make them redundant whilst they're on furlough. So some organisations might look at this as an opportunity to restructure their workforce. I think if you're going to do that, you've got to have really strong business reasons for it, and those are long-term business reasons, not just the immediate, because if you like, the immediate has been covered by furlough. So just think very carefully about that. I think for some organisations, they may end up having to do a restructure exercise at the end if it takes time for the work to come back up. But certainly if that's something that you think you're going to have to do, start thinking about it now, get your business rationale, but don't do it if you're furloughing.
Quick question. You've mentioned about clauses in current employment contracts, and if you've got this, then that. Companies able to update their employment contracts to include things that maybe they didn't have in their clauses in there originally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll get anyone to sign a new contract whilst this is going on. But interestingly, having said that, there is new regs coming in from the 6th of April around certain things you now have to include within your contracts. I mean, you always had to include certain things, but that's now been extended. So, for example, you now have to make reference to what training you're going to give your teams and whether you're paying for that or not. You have to do that. You have to put that in the contracts from the 6th of April for all new joiners, or where someone's changing a job and it warrants them having a new contract. So actually, now is a great opportunity for you to get your house in order, because you're going to have to do it from the 6th of April anyway, and look at these things. And I think really as a result of kind of what's gone on, I would imagine certainly every contract that we'll be doing, the client will be going, right, I want to make sure I've got a layoff clause in there, for example. So it's an opportunity to actually make sure you've got all of these things in there, the right to request people to take holiday without notice. Also, with effect from the 6th of April, people will have the right to a contract from day one. I mean, our advice is always issue contracts prior to people starting anyway, because you want them to sign confidentiality clauses and restrictive covenants. And once someone started with you, they may refuse to sign that contract, and it's very difficult to then take action to force that. So it's always much better to get everything wrapped up at the beginning, no different to getting your terms of business wrapped up for a potential client before you start work, so you agree what terms you're working to. It's the same for employment. So I think, this is a good opportunity to kind of review your contracts and make sure you've got those things in. God forbid we ever end up in this situation again, but it certainly makes you consider all of those things, doesn't it? Any other questions?
Yeah, Ros, can I ask a question, please? Could you just walk us through what the process would actually be if I've got a member of staff that I want to put on furlough? You touched on it at the start, where we need to obviously start with a conversation and then they get a letter. But as a business, what other things do we need to do? Do we have to contact HMRC and apply for this, or what are the steps we need to walk through?
Sure. So HMRC are setting up a portal which you'll be able to do your reclaim through, and we are waiting for guidance around the mechanics of how that's going to work. So that's still to come out. But in any way, what you'll need to do is, so you need to, once you've identified who you might need to furlough, you need to have that conversation around what you're planning to do and the impact. And that impact, of course, will be, your salary will be paid at 80% or capped at $2,500 per month, but you aren't required to work for that period at all that you're furloughed. And what I'm going to do is I'll send you a letter which you will need to sign and return to me saying you're happy to accept this contractual change, because it is contractual change. Now, if you want to top it up to 100%, that's entirely up to you. You don't have to. And I think for many people, they will understand the issue. They'll understand the situation, but it might be worth, as part of that conversation with them, is just making it very clear, if we don't do this, actually, this is the impact it's going to have on our business. So that can often be the carrot in terms of that. And then I think the other thing that we've suggested you do as part of that process, if you haven't got them already, is make sure you've got their personal contact details, so personal number, personal email, make sure you hold everything you hold on them such as address, is all correct, because there will come a point where you'll need to be in touch with them to say, hey, we're all back to work, and you need to do that really through the personal side of things as opposed to their business, because otherwise you're encouraging them to check emails. So just some practical things around that, and certainly the letters that we produce, which I think Chris may have shared anyway. No, yes.
Yes, they're all up on the Slack channel, on the C19 survival channel. So Ross keeps giving me updates. I keep updating the channel with any additional information. And there were 3 sort of sample documents that I've posted up there that you can use.
Do you need to then also have a conversation with them every 3 weeks to tell them that it's still continuing?
So it depends on how you deal with it. So if you want to just do it for 3 weeks because you think you might have work coming in, or you're doing a 3 week on, 3 week off, then yes. But in the letters that we produce, we just say it's indefinite. So if you're going down that route, you don't need to until things change.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I think one of the things we haven't probably talked about, and it's probably a different topic in its own right, is the mental health of your workforce. And keeping in touch. So whilst you might indefinitely furlough them, you need to have the mechanics in place, I think, just to check in on them. I mean, just from making sure that they're still engaged, is everything okay, that kind of thing as well, because some people are really going to struggle with this. So I think it's just probably worth thinking about that, how you might do that, whether you have a weekly catch up, just not about work, but just about generally how are things, stay in touch, or however you want to agree to do that is a good idea as well.
And should we be turning off? So we use, we've got sort of agency Slack groups. We do 9 o'clock calls, video calls with the whole team. Should they be removed from those environments?
Yeah, because I'm guessing it's to talk about work, isn't it, in the main, and what projects you've got and planning what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay.
It should, but you need to explain all of this to them. So it's more than just the contractual change and instigating the payments. It's actually about how can you keep in touch with people so they don't feel even more isolated, and that actually that they still feel part of the organisation. But explain why you're removing them from those groups, because they are purely work related. But there's no reason why they couldn't, if they wanted to, and maybe that's something they could agree to set up themselves, is set up their own WhatsApp group on their personal numbers, just to check in how things are going. But I think that's probably just a conversation you've got to have with them to see what they want to do, and then you as their employer just make sure that you're checking in with people regularly.
Yeah, that was going to be my question in terms of thoughts about setting up the informal, the mental health type of chat, which is potentially a different topic, different subject, just to make sure how everything is going, how life is going. So that would, a regular channel like that might seem sensible, not as long as it's not work chat.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely. I think there's got to be some practical element with all of this, because at the end of the day, when it's over, you want an engaged, happy workforce coming back and cracking on with things. So, but I suppose the critical thing is explaining, look, we've got to be really careful. It's not work related, which is why we want to do it on your personal. You don't have to participate. It's entirely up to you whether you want to participate in this. This is just a way of trying to make sure that everything's okay and that you stay in touch with everyone. So I think as long as you make it clear it's a voluntary thing, they don't have to participate, and they can opt in and out. They don't have to join in the conversations, then that's fine.
The other aspect that I've been thinking about is opportunity for personal development. Are they allowed to pursue anything of a professional nature?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I need to talk about around national minimum wage as well, which would be helpful around training. So I'm sorry, I'm just having to check the guidance because there is something around that, and it comes under the volunteering as well. So then I think there is. So the wording that the guidance uses is that a furloughed employee can take part in training as long as it does not provide services to or generate revenue for or on behalf of your organisation. So I'm guessing if it's just for their own personal development, then that's fine. So in terms of national minimum wage, if you've got anyone who's on the national minimum wage, the 80% is of that, because the idea being that they're not working. So actually you can pay 80% of the national minimum wage. They would fall below because they're not working. So that's fine. I don't know if any of you have got anyone in that situation. You haven't got to top it up.
So we've got apprentices with the personal training. I trust that they would be able to carry on with the training provider under furlough.
I think it's a little grey, to be honest with you. So they wouldn't be carrying out any work for you, and I guess under the apprenticeship course, I mean, are the courses still running, or is this something that would be a home? They are. Yeah. And
they're remote courses anyway, as in training providers normally come to our premises, but they can do the training via Zoom and things anyway.
So I think so the guidance does go on and talk about under the national minimum wage, if anyone who's on the national minimum wage and they complete online training courses whilst they're furloughed, then they need to have their wage topped up to the national minimum wage limit. So confused you will be. So if your apprenticeships, for example, are on national minimum wage, they can do the training whilst they're furloughed. I think that's fine, as long as it's not creating any revenue, which it won't be because it's about their own personal development. But you may find yourself in a situation where you have to top up the furlough, so at least they're receiving the minimum wage whilst they're training.
Okay, thank you.
So there is lots of guidance out there. I think just be careful about where you get guidance from. The .gov websites are pretty good. I think they're trying to be as clear as they absolutely can, but it does change, as you've probably already seen. So always go on for the latest version. And certainly, I mean, I've sent Chris some information. We, as the furlough, if anything else comes out about furlough, which I'm sure it probably will, I will forward that on to Chris. He's on my furlough email, and I'm sure he'll forward it on to you. If it's something that you're interested in getting updates from us directly, then please just email me and I can add you to our list.
So how can people get in contact with you, Ros, if they've got specific questions? So
you can either call me, perhaps Chris would share my details afterwards, or email me. Very happy to if you've got situations that arise. And I think the letters we've produced have come with very clear guidance about which letters for which in the body of an email. If you're not sure, then just email me, but I think it's in the guidance I've sent you. And I guess it is going to be a movable feast, isn't it? I'm sure more information is going to come out and may give us greater clarity around some of those question marks that we still have.
Excellent. Well, if we've got no other questions, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Ros. Hopefully that's been useful for everybody and answered some of your questions and given you a bit of clarity as to how things stand at the moment. So thank you for joining. And the next one we have is on Thursday. And this time we're going to look at legal and look at contracts with customers and suppliers and around force majeure and things like that. So I'll be sending out details around that fairly soon. Excellent. Well, stay safe and have a really good day.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.